there, it's Miss Macbeth. So this is the second of the lecture series that I'm doing for the online component in talking about differences in categories of verbs. So first we talked about irregular yo verbs. Today we're going to talk about stem changers. So stem changers as a category basically means that there is a pattern that those verbs have whenever we're talking about how they are conjugated. So if you remember, whenever we were thinking about the verb hablar, right? Whenever we think about hablar, right, we take off the AR and then we're just gonna write HABL and then whatever ending it is. When we talked about irregular yo verbs, we learned, right, that the yo form would change, but then the rest of the verb operated under a regular pattern, which is, right, take off whatever the ending is and add on the new ending based on the time and also on the subject. In this case, StemChangers tells us that before we can even add on the ending, we must change the stem and before we are able to conjugate the verb. So how do we change the stem? That's the question that we want to ask ourselves. Well, first, stem changers operate in three distinct patterns. The first pattern that a stem changer operates under is O to UE. The second is E to IE, and the third is E to I. It's important to note that these three categories and how they stem change in the present is not how they stem change in any other tense in Spanish. It is just how these verbs stem change in the present tense only. Now, some of you may ask why verbs stem change at all. And I would say that the words that are used most frequently are often the ones that will mutate the most. So stem changers actually tend to be verbs that are used more often, and this is simply why over time their pattern has altered. So we have the three types of stem changers, right? We're gonna have an O to UE type, an E to IE type, and an E to I. Then we also finally have the formation in which they change. This is something that we commonly teach in Spanish, and we say, right, that they're always gonna change in the boot. And that's because the shape that they make whenever the ones that stem change, it makes the formation of a boot. So those are the two important things to remember, right? We wanna remember O to UE, E to IE, E to I, and then we wanna remember it's always gonna change in the boot. So how does that operate in a real verb? That's what we wanna ask ourselves. So I've given us three examples here to look at. Okay, so when we have this verb, poder, you wanna notice that the stem of this verb, poder, has an O, right? This is the O that we are talking about changing into a UE. So when we talk about changing the stem, what we're saying is this O is gonna come out, and instead what's gonna go in there, right, whenever we're conjugating or before we conjugate, is we're gonna take out that O and we're gonna add a UE. That's before we put the ending on, right? Before we change the ending to reflect the subject, right? So what we're really doing with stem changing verbs is just adding an extra step. So an extra process that we have to go through and remember before we put on the ending. So that's all, really, right? We just have to think, okay, is this verb a stem changer? If it's a stem changer, is it in the boot? If it's in the boot, which of the three categories does it fall under? And if so, then what do I have to take out and put in before I can tack the stem on at the end? So we're just adding that kind of extra process. Sometimes people will ask, which is the part of the verb that will stem change? So like, for example, in verbs like this one, where there are two E's, right? Or here, there are two E's or here, right, there are two E's, or here there's an O and an E. Sometimes people will ask, well, how do I know which is the vowel that's going to stem change? The vowel that will stem change, so for example, like with preferir, we always know that whatever vowel is going to stem change is going to be closest to the infinitive. So that's our rule. This is the infinitive here. So whichever vowel is closest to the infinitive, that is the vowel that's going to stem change. And the only one. We're only going to stem change one part of the verb. So like for example with comenzar, where we have two vowels, we know that it's not the O, but the E that's going to stem change, because that is the one that is closest to the infinitive. Okay? I hope that makes sense a little bit. So if we think about poder, what we're saying is that in the boot, right, this is the boot right here, looks like a boot, the stem is going to change before we put it into the verb. So you'll see here, right, I've taken out the O and put UE and then added on the right ending for yo. Taken out the O, put the UE and added on the right ending for tu. Taken out the O, added the UE, put on the right ending for the el, ellos, usted, and taken out the O, added the E, and added the right ending for ellos, ellas, ustedes. Okay? It's important to note that this rule of knowing whether a verb ends in an ER, whether it ends in an AR, or whether it ends in an IR, and then adding that right ending is still going to apply. It's really, really important, because you'll see here, right, in the E to IE category, I've taken out this E and put in IE instead before I conjugated in the boot formation only. So that means if it's a nosotros or a vosotros form, it does not stem change. But what does that mean? It ends in an AR, so I've had to end AS, AN, AIS, AMOS, as opposed to here, right, where it ends in an E, right? These all end in E because that's an ER verb. So those rules still apply. It's still important to make sure that if it's an AR verb, you're adding AR verb endings. If it's an ER verb, you do ER verb endings. If it's an IR verb, you do IR verb endings. You gotta keep that straight, okay? That still applies here. The only thing that you're doing before you get to that point is you're going to take out a vowel and substitute other vowels. So here, I took out this E and I substituted IE, 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 before I conjugated it. And here as well, right? I took out E and I added I, and I only did it in the boot formation, right? So I took out this E and I added I here. And then I conjugated it like a regular IR verb. Because see here, it's pedimos and pedís, right? As opposed to podemos y podéis as an ER, or comenzamos o comencéis, right? Comenzáis. I made sure that I kept it within the correct endings. So let's look at how this would function a little bit more practically. How would I do it in a sentence, right? So I've given us some sentences here. All right, so this is where things get a little tricky, because sometimes it's hard for everyone to go through the process. Okay, so first I want to say to myself, okay, regar is one of the verbs that I learned were a part of the stem chaining category. Okay, so, and I learned that regar is a verb that has an E to IE conjugation. So that's the first thing that I want to think about. Then I want to think to myself, is yo in the boot? Well, it's not a nosotros and it's not a vosotros, right? Those are the only two that are outside of the boot. So I can safely say, yep, yo is in the boot. So that means I need to take out this E that's in the root. So here would be the root otherwise, right? But instead, right, I don't write this E, because what am I going to do? I'm going to supplant it with IE. okay? Now, all I need to do is write the yo AR ending in the present tense, which is o, right? Riego. Yo riego las plantas. Here, right, we have tú cerrar el café temprano. So, right, I know that this verb is a stem changer, and then I think to myself, okay, I learned, whenever I learned stem changers, that it was a part of the E to IE category. So now I'm gonna say to myself, okay, whenever we do this, right, we wanna take off the ending, right, and then we're gonna write down the root, but remember, it's a stem changer, and it's in the boot. So we wanna rewrite the ending to make sure that we change the E to IE. So I wanna change the E to IE, and then it's an AR verb, so I need the tú form in the present tense of the AR verb, which is us. See, it's just an extra step. Here, right, I have María dormir mucho. So if I have dormir, I learned that dormir is a stem changer, and it falls into the O to UE category. So I want to take off the IR, right, and then I want to rewrite the root. When I rewrite the root, right, I'm going to think, is Maria in the boot? Well, Maria is él, ella, usted. She's in that category. So yes, she is in the boot. So I would say D, and then I want to change the O to UE. So U-E-R-M. This becomes important because you want to make sure not to leave off any vowels. That's a place where people sometimes get tripped up. Then I want to take this IR and I'm going to change it, right, into the third person singular form for Maria, which is in the IR, right? So in the present tense. So I would say María duerme. Okay? Carmen y yo pensar del futuro mucho. So here, right, I know it's a stem changer. That's all we're doing right now. So I think, which category is it in? Oh, it's in the E to IE category. Here it is. So I'm going to take off the ending. I'm going to rewrite the root. But Carmen y yo. Is Carmen y yo inside of the boot? You can't just look at this, because somebody else is here. Remember, if I had Carmen and I, it would be a we in English. So if I have Carmen y yo in Spanish, it's also a we, right? Similar to how if I had Maria in English, I would think, oh, that Maria is a she, right? If I have Teresa and Ricardo, in Spanish it's ellos, but in English it would be they, right? So here, right, it's a we, so that makes it a nosotros. But nosotros isn't in the boot. So when it isn't in the boot, it doesn't stem change. So I would write the root exactly as it is, and then write the AR ending for nosotros. Yeah? Here, right, el mesero servir la comida. So I have to think, okay, I'm going to take this off, and then I think to myself, okay, it's in a category that's a stem changer. Oh, it's in the E to I category of stem changers. Is el mesero inside the boot? Well, el mesero would be the waiter. In English, that would be a he, right? So in Spanish, it would also be a he, which is él. So yep, it's inside the boot. So then I want to take this E, and I want to change it to I. So I'm going to take this E and change it to I. And then I'm going to add on the appropriate ending for he in the present tense, and if it's I or verb, which is sirve. Finally, Teresa y Ricardo volver tarde del cine. So I want to take off the ER, and I'm going to rewrite the root, but I remember volver is a stem changing verb, and I also remember that it's in the category of O to UE. So then I say to myself, okay, it's in the category of O to UE, but is it in the boot? Well, Teresa and Ricardo are a they, which in Spanish is ellos or ellas, right? In this case, it would be ellos because it's mixed gender. So that means, yes, it is in the boot. So I want to take out that O and I want to replace it with UE whenever I rewrite out the stem. Okay? And then I just want to conjugate it according to regular ER verbs that are in accordance with they, right? So vuelven. I know it can be a little tricky. You'll notice that I have asterisked decir, which is an irregular yo and a stem changer, and tener and venir, which are irregular yo and a stem changer. So those you would want to look in your book. There are also verbs within the O to UE category that are U to UE category, of which jugar is one. So that's also something to look at. You can find these stem changers on your book in page 122. I would recommend something to you, but it's personal, in that it's just something that I would do if I was trying to do this myself, which is I would make flashcards of all of these verbs in all of their conjugations, because part of what it makes it so difficult mentally is that we're just not used to it. Because in English, we don't have anything like this, right? If a verb is irregular in English, it's just irregular. There's no necessary pattern to that verb. Whereas in Spanish, irregularity can sometimes follow a pattern, like this, right? It is following a stem changing pattern. So, and that means that there are rules to how that pattern functions. Those patterns can be learned, but they take time. So I would make flashcards and just go over them in your mind, you know? Just practice doing all the different conjugations and how they're right and how they're wrong. And your brain will start to get used to it little by little. But it just takes a little bit of practice. And it also takes a little bit of memorization. I hope that this has been helpful for you and that you have found this information to be useful. As we move forward, I hope that you have a wonderful day. All right, thanks, and I'll see you next time.